What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the man himself, E.Spencer Kyte from Severe MMA and UFC.com, amongst many other places for many years. It was funny, Spencer. I was listening to I think it was a GSP. You know, who was it? I can't remember. Oh no, do you know who it was? It was a Mirko Krokop press conference from about 12, 14 years ago, and you popped out. I was like, I know that voice, and there was Spencer Kyte. So a man who's been around for a
UFC
long time.
115 here in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
He
became best friends with Pat Barry, and then knocked out Pat Barry.
That was the exact one. He said he'd leave him sitting at a window with a nurse nursing him. I think was the answer you got to your question. Someone would have.
Yeah. And he said if he will, in case of winning, that he will spend 2 years staring to the window, but he also must have one thing on his mind, that in case of loss of the fight, if I'm going to be lucky and throw a high kick, he might stare to the window 2 years too.
It must have been a good question anyway to get that from Mirko Krokop. But we're going to speak today about a man who spent, like Mirko Krokop, or seemingly will spend a lot of his time outside of the UFC in the future, and that's Francis Ngannou. And talk about the situation, maybe even touch a little bit on Jon Jones coming back as well if we've time here today. But I'd like to get, first of all, kind of get your thoughts on the situation. I think there's been a lot put out there. I've tweeted a little bit of my thoughts. I've spoken on a couple of podcasts about it. And I think sometimes with this sort of thing, Spencer, and I'll throw it over to you first of all before I make just this quick point. Sometimes these things don't get the nuance they deserve. And maybe that's our job here, but because of you're either on maybe you're anti-UFC, maybe you're pro-UFC, maybe you're unbelievably pro-fighter, which is absolutely fine to be. I think most people are, but not looking at maybe the right decisions a fighter can make for the whole, as Francis was talking about, but for the self as well, I suppose, which, we can get into all of that. But when you saw Francis was released, I suppose, first of all, maybe even before we get into the whole details of it, what was your initial reaction?
My initial reaction was just disappointment on all fronts, right? This was him versus Jon Jones was the top of my list, like just about everybody else, for the fights I wanted to see this year. I think he is an absolutely phenomenal talent that I want to see competing on the biggest stage in the sport. I fully understand all of his reasons for deciding to leave. I think, as you mentioned, that stories like this don't often get the nuance or people peeling back all of the layers or even the full context that they deserve. It very quickly turns into just a whole bunch of competing narratives. And we saw that on Saturday when Dana White announced all of this after it was, forced upon them by the fine folks at T-Mobile Arena who put up a graphic way too early and kind of forced their hand. But I think it is very much a situation where there are so many different angles to this. There's so many different talking points that are worth the time, that need to be explored, explained, discussed. I know you and Graham have done so with a bunch of it on the big show over at Severe. I've done it with some people behind the scenes. I haven't, come out and had any real big thoughts yet because, I'm often somebody that is willing to let other people kind of say what they want to say and then sit back for a day or two and just kind of do the I like that. I'm not sure about that bit. I think maybe we need to clean that point up a little bit. And so I'm happy to be here with you discussing it all.
100%. I suppose my initial reaction was the same as yours. It was disappointing. It reminded me of, just the initial reaction. It reminded me of AJ McKee last week when he signed at Bellator. Your initial reaction is I'd love to see him fight Max Holloway. I'd love to see him fight, just like you. I'd love to see Francis fight against Jon Jones. I'd love to see Francis fight Gane again. Jon Jones versus Gane, as you know, and as a lot of people know, that's my number one fight. So I'm a little bit happy about that as well. But that didn't stack up. We would have got that anyway, if Francis was still there. So that was my initial reaction. But one thing I must say, and because I think we're going to make a few points, maybe anti-Francis points here in a second, and a lot of them will be pro as well. I think most of them will be pro. I must say though, like, I do admire him taking this stance.
100%.
I don't agree with his stance, right? Let's say that first of all, for numerous reasons, which you will get into. But for someone to say it's, okay, he said it's not about money. I don't believe that for a second. It's a little bit about money, but the fact that he got the money and he still turned it down does prove his point, right? If he didn't get the money, he got everything else, I'm sure he wouldn't have done it. So you can look at it that way as well. But he did get the money. He admitted that today, when he talked to Ariel about it. Dana White said he got a lot, it was around the 8 million. He kind of confirmed that as well. So he got a lot. But he didn't get the other things he wanted. Now, we can get into them maybe in a second, but it doesn't matter for a second, right? He wanted things. He didn't get them. He said, no, I'm not signing your contract. I don't want to sign with you. He stuck these principles. I called it the other day over on Twitter, and maybe people kind of took it wrong. I said pride. I think pride is a great thing to have, to be proud, to stand by your principles, to stand by it's a great thing to have. It can be costly. It can cost you money, and there's a reason why it is that, because it does cost sometimes. And to me, in my opinion, we can talk about that as well maybe in a while. I think it will cost Francis in the long term, but for the second, and maybe to start this point out, you have to give him great credit for that, Spencer, because most people wouldn't do what he did, would they?
100%. And he said from the jump, so from after the win over Ciryl Gane last year at UFC 270, when it was the last fight of his contract, and he said, I'm essentially sitting out this next, like, had to have surgery and all like that. But this was the plan, right? Get to the point where I can go if I want to go. And he said from that point forward, it's not just about money. There's a bunch of other things here. And to stick to that, as you said, to have them put a big pile of money in front of you and you say, yeah, no, it's about more than the money is insanely commendable. I don't think anybody that knows Francis Ngannou's story, that has heard him speak about these things in the past, was actually surprised by that. Like, it would have been more surprising to me if he had done the turnaround and been like, nah, they gave me the bag and so I'm here. And we said, well, what about all the other stuff? And he was like, I got 15 mil. What do you want me to do? Like, I can't turn that down. And here's the thing. I would even understand that. Like, I think we all would understand. Like, you mentioned AJ McKee, right? He kind of looked at it and was like, I'm getting the money. Like, it's all the guys that used to fight in World Series of Fighting when it was like, oh, you're going to be a free agent. Why don't you go to the UFC? Why? So I can make less?
Yeah.
No. And so, yeah, it's absolutely commendable that he has stuck to exactly what he said he was going to do. We can get into whether it's the right decision. And I mean, framing it as right decision or wrong decision, you mentioned earlier there, the like, some anti-Francis arguments are probably going to be brought up. I don't even think that they're anti-Francis. I think it really is just presenting this from all sides. To me, it's without any bias. It's without any team allegiance, right?
Correct.
Like, our job is, yes, to scrutinize the UFC when they do things, but it's to just explain what's happening here. It's just to say, here's our thoughts on all of this. We don't have to line up behind the people that are taking on the UFC when they're taking on the UFC. Similarly, we don't have to line up with our UFC shirts on saying, no, UFC all the way. It can be nuanced. It can be a number of things. And so I look forward to getting into this.
Indeed. And I suppose it's maybe anti the decision, right? I'm sure if someone he'd made the opposite decision, say to UFC, a lot of people maybe would have argued, or we could have come on here and argued, maybe you should have done this decision, maybe you could go and box and maybe do all of that. Before we get into that, from the UFC's point of view then, right? Look, there are a couple of ways of looking at it from the UFC's point of view. There's kind of the before and after it was announced. After it was announced, first of all, maybe, Dana White came out and look, this is inarguable, I think, saying Francis Ngannou wants to fight lesser opponents for more money. Now, maybe that part is not necessarily inarguable, because if he is in MMA, he will be fighting lesser opponents and maybe not even for more money, right? But he said that in a way that demeans Francis. He said that in a way that
100%.
he doesn't want to fight the best of the best. And that's absolutely not true. He wanted to fight the best of the best for the best money under the best conditions. That's what he wanted. And that's what the UFC did not provide. And that's what happened beforehand. So the UFC offered him good money. I don't think Francis, I don't think me, you, or anyone in the world would deny that. Probably as good a money as you will get in boxing or anywhere. Massive money, fantastic money. But they didn't give him the other things he wanted. Now, let's get into this part of it. So like the couple of things he mentioned on Ariel's thing today about sponsorship, about, I know he's mentioned before about health insurance, and I think he mentioned today about a fighter advocate being able to go to meetings and things like that. And I think all of those things are absolutely things that the fighters should have, that the fighters should be fighting for, that the fighters should be getting. I've spoken about them many times before on many different platforms and many different podcasts. I think, though, if you're Francis Ngannou and you're putting your whole career on the line for that in this way, that's really foolhardy, I suppose. Like, if Francis put his career in the line, put his name towards something that was a group of loads of different fighters with professionals behind them, and we've seen it tried before and it didn't work very well, but I could understand it. We've seen people do it before. This was never, ever, ever going to work. Like, never. And we can all be, sweet summer children and think, right, okay, Francis can ask for these things and the UFC are going to give it to him, but we know well they're not. And for him to maybe, I'm sure he didn't realise that, but to go into it anyway, head first, knowing he was going to lose on those points, it just seems to me like an absolutely admirable thing, but foolhardy is the word as well. And it is the juxtaposition here, isn't it, between the pride, which I admire so much. I wish I was as prideful as him. And, in some ways I have been at times, and it's been to my detriment. Like, I think this will be to his detriment as well, but that thing, I suppose, is one of the things that I looked at. I wonder if one of the things that you've looked at and said, God almighty, that's something that needs to be scrutinized when we're talking about the decision, whether that's right or wrong.
I'm glad you kept talking. I needed a second to recuperate from we can all be sweet summer children.
I have my Game of Thrones things up here and run.
Sitting and talking to you as always. I get good ones all the time. I mean, it's exactly what you said. It's noble as can be. It is. I mean, you said there are things that you think all fighters should. It's something I think the UFC should implement themselves.
Yes.
It would make a great deal of sense. That being said, we know the situation. We know who we're dealing with. You know who you're going in there with. And if you're going to walk in there and tell the guys that got rid of fighter sponsorship in favor of their own corporate sponsorship, that you think you should have fighter sponsorship back, they're not going to give it to you. It's almost going to be a non-starter. And now we don't know all the details of the negotiations. We don't know whether any of this stuff was on the table and became a thing that they would really consider in order to keep Francis Ngannou. My guess would be no, right? Because traditionally, it has been, here's the bag of money, come and fight.
He said in his interview as well with Ariel that he asked for many things and none of them were given, basically, apart from the money.
And so, I know this sounds cynical, and I know people will say, well, but if you don't ask, you're never going to get it. But did you think going in that you were going to get it? Did you think you in and of yourself, as you said, we're going to go in and be like, hey guys, we should have fighter insurance because like this sport's rough and we should get coverage for, I don't know how long, but as long as we're in here, we should be covered. They're going to be like, man, we hadn't thought of that. Yes. Good point, big man. Can we also bring you back? It's just not going to happen. And I hate being that pessimistic, cynical bastard about it. But like,
as one of the least cynical people in MMA, to be fair to you,
if even I'm looking at it and being like, man, that was your stick. Like, again, I want every fighter to get paid as much money as they possibly can. I will be the first to sit here and say, I think if all things are equal and we're just figuring out the best way to do this, the UFC should spend more money than they do. There should be fighter insurance. There should be collective bargaining, all of those things. I am on board with all of them. But I also look at where we operate and what the actual situation is right now. And that is, they're not doing any of these things. And so if you are willing to and capable of sticking to your principles and holding to your points, I tip my hat. I have the utmost respect for you. I wish you all the best going forward. I will continue to watch and support and root for Francis Ngannou. But this wasn't ever going to happen.
It wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. And it makes me think, right? So I've thought, maybe you can call them conspiratorial maybe if you want, but I had two thoughts around this. That, first of all, why did UFC release him now? Was one of my thoughts, right? And when apparently he was out of contract at the end of last year, he had a year of matching. Any offer that could have come in, the UFC had the rights to match it. Dana White says they have waived that. Like, is there...
Which I think probably had like 2 weeks left on it, right? Because if it would have been UFC 270, then that would have been, like, that was the last fight.
Yeah.
And so it's the year from, I think it's a year
I'm
from
not sure. It seemed
270.
like it seemed like it was
I'm not
from
sure, though.
November to November. But anyway, whatever they did, it was before the contract ended. My cynical brain kind of thought there, or my maybe conspiratorial brain thought there, they did not want Francis Ngannou to come to the end of his matching rights, the end of his contract, the end of all of that, and for him to just walk away on that sunset clause or whatever it's called, and to set that precedent, right? And even if he kind of has done that in a way, he hasn't, because the UFC, we've released him, we've got rid of him, he didn't want, and they did that, right? And whether that's right or wrong, that is the perception that will be out there right now at the moment, even if people haven't thought about the point I just made. The other point, and this is a very pro-Francis point, and I hope this point I'm about to make is correct, right? I hope he did all of those things to get the UFC to basically not make a deal with him because he's such a good deal somewhere else, right?
I hope so.
I hope that is it, because like if he came in with a deal and somewhere offered him 3 million to box someone, or 3 million to bare knuckle someone, or 3 million in Bellator, or 3 million in PFL, or whatever it might be, well, the UFC would probably just match that and go, we were going to give him 8 million easily, right? So that those things, did they get him his release? I don't know. That would kind of suggest that the UFC were playing checkers and Francis is playing chess. And from this whole thing, I have never thought that. Like, I was the first one to say it as well. This whole Tyson Fury thing. Tyson Fury was using him the whole way through it just for leverage to get more money or to get someone to fight him at a certain point. I never ever believed that. But what do you think about Francis, right? And we can maybe move it from my conspiracy theory there to actually what's going to happen next. Like, do you think there is a massive money opportunity for Francis Ngannou on the clear horizon, I suppose?
I would hope, as you do, that there has to be, right? I would hope that there is, really truthfully, I hope it's the plan A and the UFC was plan B. And so it went, as you said, of like, I'll go in and ask for all these things, and if they give it to me, great. And if not, I've got this other thing kind of not in writing yet, maybe not even, the ink hasn't dried because I was still under contract, but now that I'm free, I can just go sign that deal and we get to do whatever it is that we want. I think the thing you have always maintained for any of these people, be it Nathan Diaz, Francis Ngannou, is that there's probably one. There's probably one out there. So can he get, Deontay Wilder? Maybe. Anthony Joshua? Maybe. If those fellas want to fight a great big human being and say, I'm going to take on the former UFC heavyweight champion, the baddest man on the planet, kind of follow in that Mayweather path of facing the MMA guy as Floyd did with Conor. Sure. I think that's out there. And can he get a bushel for it? Absolutely.
Can he do on that as well, right?
I think so. I think just from the spectacle of it, just from the overall whoever sanctions that, whoever puts that together will put on the table, I think it will be a big payday. Like, but will it be 8 million that he was offered in the UFC? And will there be something beyond it? That's always been your point. Okay, great. One, what next? And that's where I start to stumble, because he's not beating Deontay Wilder. I don't think he can beat Anthony Joshua. Like, I know you threw out Derek Chisora and we're like, and then he loses to Derek Chisora, and then what? And it's like, well, if that's your situation, did you maybe just make a really bad call on the basis of pride and principles?
Plus,
which again is commendable as hell. Fully, I'm backing away from the mic so that when I get loud about it, fully embrace it and support it and tip my cap to you. You are a more upstanding man than most of us. You also may have put yourself in a weird spot.
He's also not going to achieve them things if he goes anywhere else and maybe get less money out of it. Like, I think the Deontay Wilder one is weird to me. He's obviously a very exciting fighter and a good fighter, you know, even if he is the third or fourth or fifth best heavyweight in the world or whatever he might be. Deontay Wilder couldn't draw a bat of water before he fought Tyson Fury. You know, Tyson Fury would be the big fight if he can get there, a big boxing match. If he can get that. But how much is he going to get for it? Like, I saw recently he fought Chisora, and what did Chisora get? 3.5 million or something like that? Pounds maybe. So let's say $5 million. If he fights Tyson Fury, I don't think that'll be nearly as big. But Tyson Fury, if he fights Anthony Joshua, but he has Wembley, and he could put that on Wembley, and they can call him the baddest man in the band. As you said there, they can do it that way. I don't think you get as much money out of that. You have Eddie Hearn there as well, who's not going to pay you well, who is one of those people. Dana White is his idol. He tries to take after Dana White. But as you said, and the point I've been making all along, where does he go after that? Like, you get one of them, right? Let's say you do okay. You land a big shot on Fury. You land a big shot on Joshua. Fury in one way might be a good one, right? Because he might do what people accused Floyd Mayweather of doing against Conor McGregor. Carry him for a few rounds. Maybe make a rematch out of it, or maybe do enough so that he can get a Chisora fight. Chisora against Francis Ngannou. I don't think Ngannou's drawn 2 million for that. I don't know if he's drawn 1 million for that. He's definitely not drawn 5 to 8 million for that. And let's say he gets the two of them right. Best case scenario, he gets the two of them. Where to then? Like, how much can Bellator realistically pay you? And people, talking about Bellator being sold. Ariel was talking about it recently, and they haven't been signing big money names. They've still been signing good people, don't get me wrong. PFL is going to have to keep going well over the next couple of years to stay in business. Never mind, sign Francis Ngannou for 10 million or whatever and want championship the same.
And even if you go into PFL and you win the heavyweight tournament, which he would win if he signed and he was in it, he would be a prohibitive favorite to win that thing. So that's your million at the end. What are they giving you for the individual 4 fights that you have to win to get that million? Even if that's, let's say, 500,000, which is a little bit below the money that he thought was disrespectful in the UFC to face Ciryl Gane at UFC 270, which was $600,000, I believe, disclosed. Great. There's 3 mil.
And I'm sure PFL would sign him to like that pay-per-view series they've coming up.
They would give him some big deal, but like, what's that pay-per-view doing?
Yeah. This
is the other thing that I sort of have sat on for the last couple of days thinking about, is that there seems to be this reaction whenever this stuff happens. So we had it in September with Nathan Diaz running the course of his contract. We have it now with Francis, where a bunch of people go, man, the UFC screwed up. These guys are going to go somewhere and they're going to have this massive pay-per-view and they're going to make all this money and it's going to be all these things. What's the last non-UFC pay-per-view that did any good? An
MMA one? Has there ever been an MMA one that's done any good?
We talk all the time about the UFC and for the most part, the UFC is viewed as the sport for a lot of people, right? Not us in the bubble, not us hanging out here in our niche, being hardcores, but outside of us, people don't know the PFL or Bellator or ONE. And so do they suddenly go, and is Francis Ngannou a big enough star that all of a sudden people are going to follow him to wherever he goes and drop $60, $80, whatever it is for a pay-per-view to watch him fight some dude they don't know with an undercard of a bunch of other people they don't know? I just never see it, right? Like, we talk all the time about the UFC doesn't create stars. It creates those 3. It's built around those 3 letters. That's what people are looking for. And so why all of a sudden do we think that's going to change when Francis Ngannou leaves? I get that we think he is a massive star and that we understand and recognize the talent and the skill and all of those things. But this isn't Conor McGregor saying, I'm going to go box. This isn't that level of international stardom and magnitude. I don't even know that this is Ronda Rousey saying, I'm going to WWE. Like, this is where I just don't know, Shawnee.
The question you just asked, though, is also a question that PFL, Bellator, and One Championship are going to have to ask. Because the question they have to ask themselves is, do we give this guy 10 million? Will he draw it back in pay-per-views? Right. Now, I'm interested, right? Here's an answer maybe to that question, right? PFL pay-per-view series coming up. Let's say they have Francis Ngannou against, maybe they get someone, maybe Overeem. I know he already fought Overeem, but a big name like that. Or maybe it's Ante Delia or Bruno Capelloza, their last 2 champions or someone like that. And on the same card, you have Jake Paul versus Nathan Diaz, right? 2 of those and the same. How much does that draw? Like, can that draw? I think the question here and the question with that, and if they could do that, if they could pull that off, how much of the 3 letters is important now? He's like, Jake Paul has drawn in the past a bit, but he's a busted flush now. He hasn't drawn anything in his last 2 or 3 fights. We've never seen a big MMA draw outside of the UFC. Can they pull that off? And how much is someone willing to invest in the possibility of that happening?
Right.
Right. I don't know.
Is that coin flip worth it?
Yeah. Do you think that's
what it comes down to as a company?
Mm-hmm.
If you could, this is where the math of it starts to get challenging. And I know you went to school for math, so you're probably better at this than I am. But this is where it gets challenging, right? If you're Scott Coker, okay, it's going to cost me X to get this guy in here. What am I going to make? How long is it going to take for me to get that back from him being on Bellator 847 and 318 if we get there and whatever it is? When let's be clear, Francis Ngannou, 36 years old. This isn't a 28, 29-year-old, 30-year-old even heavyweight that's just and look,
he's another 15 years at heavyweight.
Heavyweight, you can stick around, but this isn't a spring chicken. Do you think he wants to fight for 5 more years? 7 more years, whatever. Like, that's
the question. Like, I think Francis has said a lot, and he's been really open with Ariel and others as well. But like, if this, and myself and Graham said it on the podcast at the weekend, but if this is a case, right, of Francis wanted to have one more fight, wanting to box Tyson Fury, get 10 million for it, and sail off into the sunset, then you know what? He might have made the right decision. This might be the right decision.
Right.
But as you said, 36 years old is not young, but for MMA heavyweight, he probably has another, 5 years at the very top, drawing an awful lot. It could be he wouldn't be the champion for that amount of time, because at heavyweight and MMA, we just know, especially like Ciryl Gane. I think Ciryl Gane finally keeps the belt. Yeah, Jon Jones is probably like the toughest matchup he'll get as well, and Ciryl Gane maybe after that, fantastic fighter, very close to last time as well. But he would have big fights. He'd have a Stipe rematch. He'd have another Jon Jones fight. Maybe he'd have another Gane rematch and earn a lot of money. They were offering him a lot of money for that. That's all a possibility for him, right? It would have been anyway. But it feels like that possibility has been blown away by this. As I said, you made the point as well, maybe he has the possibility of one big fight, and I hope he gets that. But if he has any aspirations after that to earn a lot of money and be a big star, unless he pulls off the miracle, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. And I hope against hope I'm wrong. And maybe we've been a bit negative or whatever, but I feel like we're just trying to get the truth here and tell the truth and get the logic out here, because I admire the pride. I admire him sticking to his guns. I admire him trying to earn stuff for people. But at the end of the day, you have to look at it logically, and you have to realize what he's up against here. And it's an unwinnable battle, I think, on all fronts. Yeah. And God, I hope he wins it.
I wish more people joined up with him in this fight.
Yes.
I wish it wasn't just him going in there, right? Because then maybe we can do something. Then maybe we get change. That's what happens. This isn't going to be a one man changes things. We've seen that, right? Jon Jones spent the last almost 3 years not fighting because they couldn't come to terms. They couldn't figure things out. They couldn't agree on things. And now all of a sudden, Jon Jones is back in the good graces and ready to go and been wanting to fight people, and he'll take on anybody.
What is happening there? Let's end it on that, I suppose, because we said we talk about it for a second. We'll forget about the fight, and we'll talk about the fight a lot. And it's a bit of we did a show only a couple of weeks ago, and I said that's my number one fight in MMA, and lo and behold, it happens right away.
Here it is.
I'm sad Francis isn't going to be fighting in high level MMA fights. It doesn't seem for a while, but God Almighty, what a fight that is! But forget about that for a second. How did Jon Jones just get back to oh no, I won't fight Francis. I will fight Francis, but I'll fight Ciryl as well. I'll fight Stipe. Bring Daniel Cormier back. I'll fight Adesanya. Give me them all. Give 2 fights in a night. How did that happen for a guy who seemingly wouldn't fight anyone? I was willing to sit out for 2 years not to fight. How did that happen?
I mean, the sunny side version of me wants to think that the fire is back and he's just ready to prove himself and tired of people slandering my name and want to show all these fools that haven't seen me in my last couple fights. And, somebody got in his ear and was like, John, your last couple fights, they weren't great. And so maybe there's a generation of people that haven't seen Jon Jones certified badass. Yeah. And there's a bunch of people that haven't seen Jon Jones, the badass. And so maybe he got a little bit of that I got to go prove something. The not so sunny side version thinks, maybe the bank account got a little light, and this is the best way that I could do this, and I can't keep sitting out, and I'm clearly under contract. I can't go anywhere else. There's nothing else for me. I'm tired of just going to the gym and training with Maurice Green and hitting pads with 6-gun and lifting weights. So I may as well do something and earn some bank. And so at some point, I mean, really, it feels a little bit like Jon Jones is the version of Francis Ngannou that buckled, right? Sat out for a little bit, hung out for a little bit. I'm not going to do this. I want what I'm worth. I want what I want. And they gave him look, as we said, he got what he wanted. He's happy to be back. It's a choice he gets to make. Grown ass man, free will. Great. I'm happy to have you back. I'm really excited about this fight. I'm super curious, but it certainly feels a little bit weird that all of a sudden Jon Jones is kind of the prodigal son.
I don't think Jon Jones was fighting for Jimmy Flick and Darren Till and Charles Jourdain and all that.
I don't think so. I don't think he was in there advocating for anybody else.
I think a big part of it as well, and we'll leave it on this, but I actually think when Jon Jones left Jackson Winklejohn and he's with Cejudo or whoever he is now, I actually think that was a big turning point in this whole saga, because I think Jon Jones wants to prove that it wasn't them who won it for him. It was me who won it. It was Jon Jones is the key. Jon Jones is the legend. And, he maybe wants to say they were the ones that were bringing me down for my last couple of fights as well. And by God, if he wins this, it'll be an absolutely massive win. And you know what? I'm looking forward to it. We'll talk a lot more about that, obviously, in the preceding couple of months. We will leave it there. Spencer, thank you very much for joining me. If you're not following him, follow him over on Twitter at, is it E.Spencer Kyte or Spencer?
No, it's just Spencer Kyte.
Spencer Kyte. There you go. You can find him over there. Find all his work there as well, SevereMMA.com and all the good places as well. And thank you, Spencer, again for joining me. Thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and I'll see you all next time.